Buenas tardes a todos y gracias por estar aquí. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you, Darly, for being here with us. Please excuse me for speaking Spanish a little while. Bienvenidos al Colegio Oficial de Arquitectos de Tenerife, La Gomera y El Hierro. Para dar comienzo a la jornada, contamos aquí con el decano del colegio que nos va a decir un par de palabras. Welcome to the Architects Union of Tenerife, La Gomera y El Hierro. For starters, we'll have some words of the institution's dean, Argeo Semán.
Buenas tardes a todos, gracias por venir. Para mí como decano del Colegio de Arquitectos y para nuestra Junta de Gobierno, y yo creo que para los arquitectos de Canarias en general y especialmente de Tenerife, es un orgullo contar con ustedes y apoyar, por supuesto, a nuestro equipo de la incertidumbre en todas las actividades que hace, porque yo creo que realmente es un mensaje importante y es una reflexión que debemos hacer entre todos. Yo creo y confío plenamente en que de esta jornada salgan cosas interesantes y que se plasmen y que se puedan divulgar para el conocimiento de la reflexión entre todos. Reiterarles nuestro apoyo absoluto, y lo saben ellos personalmente, pero que además lo queremos manifestar. Creo que todos los que son arquitectos, los que estén aquí, que me imagino que la gran mayoría son arquitectos, estamos además en un edificio y en un salón de actos especialmente que tiene un valor arquitectónico importante y que para nosotros es nuestra pequeña joya. Este año 2022 se cumplen 50 años de la construcción de este edificio. El año pasado se cumplieron 50 años de la constitución del Colegio de Canarias, con lo cual todo esto se engloba en un año especialmente importante para nosotros. El año que viene, además, cumplimos 50 años de la primera exposición de esculturas, exposición internacional de esculturas en la calle. Fue la primera vez que una ciudad convirtió sus ramblas, sus paseos, su parque en un gran museo al aire libre. Y el año 2023, que también queremos hacer nuestra gran celebración, será los 50 años de esa exposición. Con lo cual todo esto es como un hilo conductor que nos parece genial para fomentar el valor de la arquitectura y la presencia de la arquitectura en la sociedad. Así que gracias equipo, gracias a todos por participar y me alegro mucho de haberlos visto por aquí. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Argeo. Okay, so back to English now, just for the rest of the day. We would like, excuse me for reading, we would like to start by thanking all our supporters, el Ministerio de Transportes, Movilidad y Agenda Urbana, Acción Cultural Española, especially to Teresa Las Casas, she's always al pie del cañón, tu Gobierno de Canarias, and of course, tu Colegio Oficial de Arquitectos de Tenerife, La Gomera y El Hierro, which has given us their support and their space for this event and a lot more. As most of you know, last year, we had the honor of representing Spain as curators of the National Pavilion at Bienal Arquitectura in Venice with our project Uncertainty. As the pandemic really hit this edition of the international exhibition, we found ourselves with some extra time that the Korean pavilion curator, Hai Won-shin, brilliantly managed to turn into a collaborative team of connected international curators. The Curators Collective, she's wearing the t-shirt, that met online several times before the opening of Biennale and then held various events, both in Venice and online during the exhibition months. Common uncertainty stems from our desire to host a Curators Collective in-person event. It seems that a year after Biennale, the question Hashim Sarkis posed as the general topic, how we will live together, is not only still relevant, but more so even. Also, the answers he received by each country and each participant is, again, like reinforced in its, I think it's more relevant now. So we want these 2 days to help reflect about these proposals, their current relevance, their evolution, the progress they have reached over the past year, and having 10 teams here to speak also helps to connect and extract synergies between these proposals, trying to focus once again on the future and on the actions required to make it more efficient, inclusive, environmentally conscious, and more pacific, if we can. Both days, today and tomorrow, will have the same agenda. First, we will have 3 presentations, followed by a small coffee break, and then 2 more presentations and a round table. And so let's just start. Our 3 speakers of the day are Raquel Ares and Iñaki Albistur from the team, who together confirmed the studio Arquimaña. In their own words, an architectural and design practice where they apply a non-static architecture that adapts and interacts with the user, working with technology as a tool to make them more free and self-sufficient. They exhibited in the Spanish pavilion with their project Open Bike. Please, Iñaki, if you join.
Hello. Well, first of all, I apologize my strong Spanish accent, so that's the way it is. Let's start. Well, first of all, we would like to start saying that the most important thing in this project is not the bicycle itself, but the message. That is why we call it a manifesto. This project stems from passion for bikes and the arrival of industrial technologies in the domestic and educational spheres that have allowed many architects and designers change their way of working. It is also important to mention the open source philosophy and the shared knowledge from which we have learned a lot and we have enriched as professionals. Nowadays in Spain, the average number of bikes per inhabitant is around 0.6, and despite being a relatively high figure, there are not enough policies in favor of bikes, and what is worse, there is an urban infrastructure not prepared to hold it. So in our project, we see citizens as transformative agents, not as mere spectators. The designs of the bikes are open source to make them more accessible and to be able to learn from them, correct them and modify them to share them again on the web. Manufacturing in the city itself, we reduce transport of materials, and we generate productive activity in the cities. Not only is the null emission of gases evident, but it is also a matter of space. Space is limited in the cities, and the more cars, the less space is for citizens. Well, another positive point of view of the project is that the bike is an universal transport and it's adaptable for every person. So the result is this: it's a bike. It's a bicycle design which some parts are made with digital fabrication tools, such as 3D printing or CNC cutting, and other parts can be reused from old bikes or can be being bought locally. Where you can see there some parts which are fabricated, and some parts are get locally. That's the pieces being fabricated. And well, this is a somewhat long journey. It started on 2015 we made a prototype and made an open call in our city, in San Sebastián, in the Center of Contemporary Culture in Tabacalera. And we made an open call to invite more people to join the project. We get this result. We made our first bike, and it was running very precariously, but it was running. And then we continued the project ourselves in the studio with some revisions of it. Through the years, we have made the bicycle more compact to be more adaptable for any person. And well, that's the bike, the last bike, who's been in the Pavilion of Spain since it was selected for the Venice Biennale. It was also selected for the Seoul Biennale of Architecture and Urbanism. And because of these two events, we could ask for institution support, and we were able to make a website to spread the project and to be able to give it more visibility. It has been honored in some other prizes and categories. It has been on European Bauhaus, and thank you to the website. It has around 2,000 downloads all around the world, and well, some people, we have the feedback of some people. For example, North Carolina, that's second photo is Seoul. That's in Wuhan, there is the biggest community of open bike, and the other photo is from Holland. Well, that's the credit, and I will show you now a short video from the web and from a video we made for the bike. Let me see. This is the first one. This is the website. You can, if you enter on the website, you can scroll, and it's like well, it's the manifesto itself through the web, and it converts in a cleaner city through fabricating the bike. We'll go faster. And then in the web you can find all the revisions we have made through the years. Well, I'm sorry, this is a bit boring, it has no music, but I will put you the other video. Well, and in the end, well, before finishing, just thank you for inviting us, and I will let you with the video.
Okay, so thank you very much. Fantastic, fantastic, Iñaki. Thank you. Next, we welcome Miguel Arraiz. He has his own architecture practice. He has his own architecture practice, specialized in both classical, residential, and mixed-use buildings, and an ephemeral, more artistic side, which is manifested in his fallas and urban interventions. He was in charge of the cultural activities of the Valencian Order of Architects from 2002 until 2008. After that, he started to investigate in the Valencian Order of, on the field of urban art, creating the firm Penck Intruder. That was a project organized by a group of artists with expertise in performing interventions in urban space, edition of art, and organization and coordination of cultural events until 2018. He is currently the project director of Valencia World Design Capital 2022 and has been in charge of the design of the World Design Capital Pavilion, El Ágora, in the main square of Valencia City. One of the highlights of his career was Renachment, the Burning Man honoraria project that was built in Nevada during Burning Man 2016. With this project, he took part in the Spanish pavilion. So okay, I give it to you. Okay, it's... Okay, thank you.
I don't know if to sit down to see if you don't see me very well like this. Maybe I try like you. Okay, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this event, also to this special group of people that we have been working and speaking through all this time. I'm just going to tell you a little story that starts especially at the moment that I decided not to be an architect anymore. And from that moment is really the moment that I have felt more as an architect as ever. I don't know, as you know, we have in Valencia this tradition called Las Fallas, that we put the city plenty of sculptures, more than 1,000, and we set them on fire on the 19th of March. So in the year 2009, with all the crisis of construction, I quit architecture and started to practice this more artistical part. So it's always good to go back to the origins. So this is the first intervention that I made in the city. It was just kind of game. And as you know, we always set them on fire. So it's a work that lasts for only 1 year. But it was just the beginning, no? It was just, we saw that only a small change in the tradition, it generates such a big debate. And when you put something on the street, as an architect, it's really interesting, this debate that generates. So I decided to continue with this kind of project. So next year, this is what we built in the middle of the city. As you can see, all the traditional people that likes fallas, they were trying to kill me because I don't know if you have seen the picture of fallas. This is not really like the traditional one. But at the end, we always go back to the fire, so everything was okay. And we kept on working on that. The important thing is also answering to the question how we will live together, is that these works were not made by just an artisan. So I was introducing like the people from the neighborhood, working with all the people, with children in risk of exclusion, and with the schools. So in such a way, I was leading the design of the project, but the construction and everything, it was a way of working together. So this is the project that we made last year, that it was kind of wooden towers. And as always, the final part that is, okay, maybe you are not from Valencia, you don't understand this, but this is the best part, for sure. Next year, we change and we work with cardboard, and we made this pavilion also, and again, the fire. And one thing that we were also trying to put in this project is just to recover like the public space, because in these monuments that we normally do in fallas, they put like these sculptures, they fence it, and you know, there is no relation between the art and the public. And we kept on working. This is a picture of the traditional falla, so you can imagine when I was proposing these projects. And after working several years in Fallas, we arrived to get the commission of building the Falla, this one, that changed from this kind of monument to this kind of monument next year. So you can imagine during construction, we even needed some security people, because they were traditional ones, they were trying to jump the fence and hit us because we were like killing the tradition. But somehow we changed like the way that these monuments react with people. All the floor, it was 100,000 pieces of tiles, wooden tiles. That was, take a little of water, sorry. That were made with schools with kids in risk of social exclusion, and that was the interior. This is the tiles that I told you. So there were projects that, in somehow, they were generating, like a collective, and included not only the people that work in this festivity, they were including like the whole city. These were the pavilion. But unfortunately, this was a prototype. This is what happened the last day of Fallas, but it felt in a nicely way, and we learned a lot about the structures. And at that moment, well, I was not more an architect, I was doing these things, but at that moment I realized, okay, I'm not going to be an architect anymore, for sure. But chances in life, we received like a phone call from Burning Man. I don't know if you know about that. It's not a festival, it's an event that happens in the middle of the desert that gathers like 80,000 people. That gathers like 80,000 people, and they ask us to bring some art that connects these two festivities of fire, the Fallas and the Burning Man. And, well, this is how big is that place. If you can have the chance to go, it's a place to go. And this is like the last day when they burn, like the man in the middle, and the 80,000 people gathered there. But what we found here is something that we have been working like these previous years in Valencia, the things that we always wanted to change in our festivity. For example, you see this image, that at the end is the piece that we brought to the desert. In this event, there are no spectators. Everyone is a participant. For example, if you go back to Valencia, you have participants that are the queens, the politicians, and the rest of the population is a spectator. So are these kind of values that once we went to Burning Man, we decided that things that we think that are not possible, there was a place where they were possible. For example, about cleaning. Everything you do in the desert, you have to leave the desert better than before. So they even, I don't know how's the word, but they clean even the sand. And if you go to Valencia or any party, pues, this is what you find. I always explain it, the only thing that you find in the desert that the organization puts you is like these chemical bathrooms. And I was living there 21 days, and I didn't have to clean the bathroom, not once. So it's like a community, when they go together and they understand how to live together, they can improve things a lot. At this event, there is no money. Even the exchange, you cannot exchange things. So everything is based in gift economy. So, wait a second. So, for example, there was a group of volunteers that were with the van and the microwave, and they were going through the desert, telling people that were building the art. ¿7 solo? Me quedan 7. that was the art that we were building, and then maybe it was 6 o'clock in the morning, and they arrived with this van, and they put these sofas, they put the microwaves, and they say, stop working. Now we are going to give you a massage, we are going to feed you, and that's what we do. And they were volunteers, that they were gifting things, and they were the whole day going from art to art, speaking with people, and that's, you know, when there is no money, no gifting, everything is gifting economy. But for example, when you go back to our festivities, what you find is that the art is not that important, but because the important thing that you have to put there is this Estrella Damm, or this thing of the brand of the beer is the most important thing that you find there. And then, it was also this relation between Valencia and Burning Man about the fire. They are lucky because they can explode things in the middle of the desert. I have tried to do that in Valencia, but not yet. It will arrive the day. And this is the piece that we brought to the desert in 2016. That was part of the pavilion. This is at night. And apart from also in this project, we also made these tiles on the floor, but we also were searching on the workshops of artisans of fallas, and we found like molds, maybe 60 or 70 years old, and any of those faces are from all the artisans of the history of Las Fallas that we wanted to bring it and to include that in the project. So we were not including only the schools, the citizens, we were also including like the history of the artisans. And well, it was that the project, and this is the only, this is when I said that I quit architecture, but all this history of doing ephemeral art finally brought me to go back to architecture. And this is the pavilion of the World Design Capital, that is Valencia during this year. And from the things that I have learned from all these ephemeral projects, they told me that I have to, at the end, well, this is a crazy story I'm not going to tell here, but at the end, I had to make the pavilion. And everybody told me, okay, a pavilion for a World Design Capital, you need a closed space for the business, they can show their products, they have to, how do you say, okay, you need to answer to the people that pays for this. So I don't know how I made it, but I decided not to take into account any of those inputs of the briefing. So the project at the end, instead of being a closed space, it was an open space for citizens that during the 24 hours of the day, it could have a use and make the central square better. And somehow it was worse for us, because when we want to make any round table, any concert, any whatever, we need to include like ephemeral architectures, and it has more cost, and also all the sponsors that want to show their chair or want to show their product, they arrive there and say, okay, this is not prepared for us. But somehow I convinced them with the history of the other projects that the most important thing was to make this project as a gift to the citizens. And okay, as you can see, it's all ceramic facade, completely open, and then in the ceiling, we also recover a traditional artisanal way of doing fallas, and it represents like the Mediterranean, like a wave, and the Mediterranean as the place of gathering and sharing things. That was the best thing as a World Design Capital. That at the end, we are World Design Capital not because we are the best designers, it's just because we have the chance to have the best designers in our city during this year. And okay, this is a general picture. And then we made like a laser intervention inside, and I think that's all. Thank you.
Great, Miguel, thank you. It's entertaining. Yeah, but below. Thank you so much. Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Thank you so much, Miguel. Our next guest is Madeleine Kessler, a co-founder of Unseen Architecture and director of Madeleine Kessler Architecture. Trained as an architect and engineer, she has worked at the studios in Basel, Beijing, and London on projects including Battersea Arts Centre, Theatre Royal Drury Lane, and Oslo Airport City. She sits on the National Infrastructure Commission's design group and teaches at the London School of Architecture at Architectural Association. She was named in the Architects Journal's 40 Under 40 and awarded the Royal Institute of British Architects Rising Star Award. She also co-curated with Vanigi Verghese the Garden of Privatized Delights, the British Pavilions project for Biennale in 2021. So please, Maddie, if you will join. Let's give it.
Thank you. I just changed the presentation. Thank you. Sorry. It's okay.
No, you've got it like in the
okay. Thank you so much for having me here today. I have to say, it was such a weird experience, I think, curating a pavilion in a pandemic. And as Sophia alluded to earlier, it was so incredible when we all finally met for the first time this time last year. And it's amazing to be able to continue that dialogue again here today. So thank you so much for all you've done to organise this. And the previous two presentations were fascinating. So onto the Garden of Privatised Delights, which was our project for the British Pavilion at the Venice Biennale last year. And we've brought back to the UK and is sort of continuing today. So I'm going to take you through that journey today. So the Garden of Privatised Delights was curated by myself and Vanigi Verghese. And the project really dates back to 2015 when we taught a summer school together at the Architectural Association all about the pub. And we were really interested in how the pub is an interior space, which is often overlooked, but it is the privatised public space, sort of, you know, the original kind of inviting people into people's living rooms. And pubs were sort of closing up and down the country, and how could we rethink that for the 21st century so that they could survive? And this is actually an issue that's become more and more pressing through COVID and even today. And so this kind of introduction into the pub sort of led us into this world of privatised public space where we started to look at it more broadly. And so this is a project called Who Owns England by Guy Shrubsole and Anna Powell-Smith. You can Google it, it's just called Who Owns England. It takes you to a website. And they've basically documented all the land ownership across England and Wales that exists on the Land Registry's website. So it's only over the past few decades that if you sell a piece of land, that has to be documented on this government website. Otherwise, that piece of land, it's not documented, so the only person who knows that they own it is the person who owns it. So it's really not transparent, the land ownership in the UK. And often, even when it is documented, it's owned by an overseas holding company. And so this is really problematic, that you don't really know who owns the land you're walking on or who owns the land near you. And this is a sort of example of how it can become so problematic. So this is a square in London called Paternoster Square. It's just by St. Paul's Cathedral. And it sort of feels like a very public square. At lunchtimes, people are sitting there eating their lunches. And in 2011, there were some protests called the Occupy protests, and people were protesting on this square. But it turns out the square is actually privately owned. It's owned by the Mitsubishi Estate Company, and protesting was a rule that people were breaking by being on the square. So they got told they had to leave, and they had to sit on the boundaries of the square. And it becomes really scary when in a city you don't know who owns the land you're walking on, you don't know what the rules are on that piece of land until you break them. And so we really wanted to delve more into this topic of public and private and what these spaces really are and how we as architects can sort of open them up to make them more inclusive. And our starting point for the Garden of Privatised Delights was this painting by Hieronymus Bosch called The Garden of Earthly Delights. It's an incredible painting, but what we really loved was how it's set up as a triptych with sort of heaven on the left, hell on the right, and this middle ground in between. And we took that painting to create our own kind of version of it called the Garden of Privatised Delights, where we sort of reimagined the utopia of the Commons before the Enclosures Act, the dystopia of total privatisation, and then this middle ground that we're all really living in. And this became a really useful tool to sort of bring people together around this conversation that's often a sort of very binary conversation. People often just sort of assume private's bad, public's good. But in fact, we all do live in this weird middle ground. So how do we, as architects, as clients, as communities, how can we navigate that middle ground to create more inclusive and accessible spaces? So as you entered the British Pavilion, you're sort of entering into that middle ground, and you're immediately confronted by these railings. You could see there's something going on behind, but you can't actually access it. And that sort of sets up the issue of privatised public space, that often it's only accessible to those who have a key. And you're forced to continue around the whole pavilion until you found yourself back inside the Garden of Delights. And so the British Pavilion has 6 rooms, and we invited different room designers to design a main installation in each of those rooms. And 4 of them were sort of around a topic of a physical type of privatised public space, and 2 are ministries which are engaging with the legislation around privatised public space. So you, after entering the pavilion, you're sort of immediately ushered on into the pub. And this room's really exploring the importance of the pub in the 21st century and how we can redefine it so that it can survive. This became particularly pressing actually in the COVID lockdowns, when for the first time in British history, every single pub closed. And it's even more relevant today actually with all the energy prices. The rate of pub closures is really high. And where you see a very high rate of pub closures, particularly in rural areas, you often see then an onset in other problems like alcoholism. Because pubs, yes, they are a place that people go to drink, but they're also these real kind of community centres that bring people together. So the decorators, they designed this main installation in the room, which is this bar which drops to different heights and integrates different sort of infrastructure like a letterbox, plug sockets, and really sort of brings people around a table and allows it to sort of function as a sort of modern day post office community centre. And then they took these artefacts from pubs around the UK. So you can see these 2 Wetherspoons carpets on the bottom left. So Wetherspoons is the largest pub chain in the UK, and every single pub they own has a different carpet to try and make it feel locally specific. It's also quite a contentious pub chain because the owner of it, he sort of was a huge supporter of Brexit, and he used his pubs as a way to put propaganda out. And then the staff who worked there, they're often European and anti-Brexit, so they would put sort of counter-propaganda out, and it became quite a sort of contentious space. And then this is the landlord from the Bevy pub in Brighton, which is the only community-owned pub in the UK on a council estate. And in the lockdowns, when every pub had to close, that pub became like a really important place that would serve meals to people who couldn't afford them. They sort of had this huge kind of way to engage with the people on the estate. So from the pub, you then entered into the Ministry of Collective Data by Builtworks. And this is looking at sort of legislation around facial recognition technology. And so it's really exploring how the technology itself isn't inherently bad, but the way that we're using it is. And so are there ways that we could use it for public benefits? Sort of are there ways that we could collectively own the data that's being collected and sort of together choose how that's used going forward? And then from the Ministry of Collective Data, you entered into the high streets of exchanges by Studio Polpo. And this structure is sort of exploring how how important our high streets are, not just from an economic perspective, but also a social perspective. And so with the closure of shops on our high streets, we see both the closure of kind of physical shops economically, but also these kind of social centres. So are there ways that we can sort of reinvent the spaces on our high streets and make sure we not only just maintain them as a social centre, but kind of enhance that somehow? And so, for example, when you go and get a haircut, you're not just getting a haircut, but you're also getting a conversation with someone, which can be really important, for someone who's elderly, and it's, it might be the only conversation they have that day. And so the structure was sort of split into 3 parts: listen, share, and act. And so when you entered, you sort of encountered this ATM, which instead of dispensing money, dispensed advice. And then in the center of the structure was this sort of table for sharing meals at, which kind of really referenced back to a project they're involved with in Sheffield called Sheffield Food Hall, which is a pay-as-you-feel project. So they sort of collect leftover fruit and veg from surrounding supermarkets, and then people just pay whatever they can afford for that meal. And then ACT, where it looks at kind of the roles that you can take on in a community. And then from there, you stepped into the Ministry of Common Land, which was designed by Public Works. It's the second ministry, and this is looking at sort of bottom-up approaches to land ownership and citizens' assemblies. And so the ministry structure, it's designed as sort of a round structure rather than a traditional top-down structure at a table, which really allows everyone to sort of have the same kind of hierarchy and role within the space, and encourage this form of citizens' assemblies. And then they also referenced these amazing kind of masks that were built by local school children in Stratford of the kind of founding fathers of public space. Ooh. And then from there, you stepped into Play Without Grounds by VPPR, which was looking at spaces for young people and teenagers in the city. So it was really looking at how there's just nowhere in our cities for teenagers anymore. There's been a huge rate of closure of youth centres, and as soon as teenagers sort of gather as a group, they're sort of seen as a threat and sort of ushered on and asked to go somewhere else. So it was looking at how we could create frameworks for teenagers to be able to inhabit, and it played these conversations with teenagers from around the UK, talking about the spaces they'd like to see. I suppose on the kind of form of this, as with the forms of all the structures, they're taken from that original Bosch painting and the colour palette as well. And then you had found yourself back inside the Garden of Delights. This time you were on the inside, and there's kind of this sort of abstracted tree which allows for different activities around it, space to contemplate, spaces to play, grow things, talk to one another, get to know one another. And this was a space where everything sort of comes together. And then finally, there was kind of a surprise 7th room in the basement of the British Pavilion. So the British Pavilion is one of the few pavilions in Venice which has toilets in its basements. And when we went over and they were installing for the Art Biennale, we noticed it was a huge social hub because everyone was coming to use the toilets. And so we wanted to open up the toilets, recognizing that actually toilets are a really important proponent in opening up our public spaces. It's all well and good to provide a really nice park or a really nice public space for people to use. But unless you have that infrastructure, toilets, free seating, free water, for people to truly use it for free, it's not really a free-to-use public space. But we encountered all sorts of problems trying to open up these toilets. Firstly, the British Council thinking it was too embarrassing. And then the Biennale sort of pointing out that the toilets themselves didn't meet some of the local building regulations. So instead, we put them on display. And we painted the toilets in this toxic green, which our graphic designer had identified as the antithesis of any colour in the painting, and put these photographs up of toilets from around the UK just to show how inadequate the provision of public toilets is. There's nothing in legislation to protect the public toilets, so often when councils lose their funding, they don't invest in toilets anymore. And as a result, it really impacts the most vulnerable in society, like the elderly, pregnant people, those with certain diseases. And then just to say, I guess, obviously this was an exhibition that we began working on in 2019, and all the installations were envisaged to be really interactive and for people to play with. We always envisaged that these installations would then come back to the UK into different public spaces. But with COVID, sort of things changed slightly, and we had to think much more about how we could communicate this as an exhibition to people who couldn't necessarily visit it. And so we started by doing a load of videos, and then we had the interactive tour, which you can go on. I think you can find it on Google Maps. But finally, we also managed to find a space for it to come back to in the UK. Although we always wanted the actual installations to go into public spaces around the UK, it suddenly became important to us that we could bring everything back together in one space one more time for people to be able to visit who weren't able to go to Venice. And so we found this space at the Building Centre. They very kindly allowed us to exhibit in. It's on display at the moment, and I suppose it's a very different space to the British Pavilion, and this is an exhibition that wasn't designed for that space, but in many ways I think it almost works a lot better. It's one open space, so you start to see the relationships between the different types of privatised public space that I've just taken you through a lot more, rather than saying, oh, it's the pub, it's the high street, it's everything working in relationship together. But also the installations sit as part of the cafe there. That's a place that's free for people to come and visit, so you get people coming back and going there and coming back. In Venice, I think Venice is amazing because you get the international dialogue, but it's a very different audience, and it's people who've purposefully gone to Venice to see the Biennale, whereas now we have people who just step in off the street, not having any idea of what the Venice Biennale is, suddenly stumbling in and finding out more. So it's been a very different kind of dialogue and conversation we've been having. We also did manage to open up a toilet in the building centre, rather than just put it on display, which has been great as well. And so they have a disabled toilet. It was already publicly accessible, but no one knew it was there. So we've now highlighted that in the space. And the climbing frame for teenagers, that now sits outside the building centre. And it's just constantly in use at all times of day and night, not only by teenagers, but also local office workers, like kids, everyone. And it's been amazing to see that space be used. I mean, it's been so popular that people are now asking if it can be there permanently. And yeah, just I suppose it's just been amazing to be able to bring in that different audience. We've been doing a series of events as well, really trying to target in particular young people from the local area who wouldn't necessarily have sort of an opportunity to go to Venice, and just show them, engage them more in this dialogue, because a lot of this for us was about trying to widen the dialogue about privatised public space, not just have this kind of conversation of architecture for architects, but really engage people from all walks of life into how we can make these spaces more inclusive. And every time I go down, it seems to be being used as different in different ways. So this is when some people were using it for like a sort of presentation meeting. It's just amazing to see people start to use the exhibition in ways I think that we'd never really imagined. So yeah, thank you. Hopefully that's the 15 minutes.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. Okay, that was brilliant. So everybody, please, we now have a 20-minute coffee break, so you can join us at the lobby. Let's go.
Olá. Olá, que tal?
Agora, sou eu. Não, eu. Sim, está a funcionar bem, ouve-se bem. Mais alto. João, acabamos.
Agora sou eu, sim. Bueno, sim.
E agora sou o quarto a falar. João, e vais tu falar, depois ficas tu em palco. E nós saímos de estresse.
Não, vai ter que voltar.
Ou voltas, sim, voltas, exato. Ele podia ficar.
Não pode nada.
Eu sei, então.
Allô, 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 allô. C'est bon? On m'entend? ¿Sí? ¿Está bien o no?
hope you had some time. Julian, when you tell me. Okay. 5, 4, 3. Okay. Okay, so, well, let's get back to our session. I hope you had time to take something. With the contribution of DEPA Architects, they are a collective formed in 2009 that covers the areas of architecture and the social sciences, focused on researching architectural practices through active listening of the idiosyncrasies of each project. There is a specific commitment to the dimension of time in the interventions, ranging from the interpretation of existing structures and architectural heritage to the open and progressive reintegration of spatial systems. They seek to keep its practices and investigations relevant by taking part in competitions, which are special moments for wide-ranging and compelling research. They have achieved several prizes and shortlistings. Among them, in 2019, they won a contest to curate the Portuguese representation at the 17th International Architecture Exhibition at Bienal de Venecia in 2021 with the In Conflict project. So please welcome Carlos, João, Luis, and Miguel.
Hello? Hello? Yeah, can you hear me? Yes. So thank you for coming, of course, and sorry for my bad English. Anyway, I think you rather want us to speak in bad English than in good Portuguese, so well, it makes this easier because most of you already know our pavilion. But before we go into its repercussions in the present day, and we hope in the future, we will explain a little bit of what we did in Venice. In Conflict, proposed to revisit a selection of processes of Portuguese architecture in democracy, shaped by a wide-ranging public debate between political powers, the press, and the civil society. City and territory, as collective constructions, are the primary arena of conflict. In conflict here is understood as the action of opposing forces translated into dissension. This condition is for us implicit to a pluralistic democratic space and shapes architectural production today, or it should be. So, in other words, we wanted to enhance the idea of the architect not only as a technician or a fancy designer, but mainly we wanted to reinforce and enhance the importance of the public role of architecture on the decision-making today and in our future, and the importance of the public debate on the huge issues that we are facing now. So the architect has to be more a moderator, of course, always a designer, but more a moderator, and learn with the public debates on the projects at the same time. So that's why you will see that we use the press as a way to show how important it is to discuss architecture, our future, our public space through the public debate, and also to communicate with more people than only architects. So this is a communication tool we found in our exhibition. Yes, and of course, again, we wanted to reinforce the hidden power of architecture, which is the public debate, or as Dom said, really the all power of architecture. So before we look to the present day and the future, in the exhibition we looked a little bit back first to several past Portuguese projects where architects played an important role and sometimes failed, because it's important to learn with it. beyond the design. And we try to learn with these projects. So the projects we presented there raised questions from the importance and the right to have a house and a place, the issue of the refugees, the condition of the cities, the management of the territory, the formal city or the informal city, the public participation in the projects, the big territorial infrastructures, and of course, again, the management of the territory, the resources, and its impacts in the landscape, and also the way we deal with the catastrophic situations. And actually, it's funny because this was a picture we used in the exhibition. It's from the beginning of the century, when we had a bubonic pledge in Porto, and they were burning all the houses to deal with the problem, and we were living our pandemic 100 years after that. So, but yeah, architecture also has to deal with these catastrophic situations.
So from these themes that João just shown, we took to Venice curatorship based in two parallel moments. So on the top floor, you see here, this is Palazzo Justinian Lalin, and on the top floor, on the top floor of the palazzo, we showed 7 projects from Portuguese context, presented, as João was explaining, not by the typical architectural supports, I mean drawings, models, etc., but from the media coverage, which in most of the projects are quite controversial, and they testify in some way the public involvement on the projects, and we wanted to show that. We were not aiming to speak to other architects, of course we also were, but we want to speak mainly to the people that participated in the debate and that helped to build these processes. The exhibition, you see here the back part of these walls where we show all the news. Some of you had the opportunity to visit the exhibition. And from the news, maybe sometimes you can understand better the projects than from the models or the drawings itself. Of course, the exhibition was then crystallized in a catalog that aimed to give further information on the projects, but also to give it a permanent dimension, to keep something an object that we can keep. On the ground floor, and as I was saying before, we have these 2 moments, the exhibition, but also on the ground floor, we want to give a more future look to it, a more proactive perspective. And we want to create a series of debates that are represented in Palazzo by this big debate table, that it's an open space for everyone to come and discuss themes. And from this symbolical object, we allowed several different teams to organize and to create debates. Not only in Venice, but also in Porto and in Lisbon, creating this nice triangle that would somehow mix other themes that we were not focusing on our curatorship, but that we wanted to give space. And we mean, for instance, themes as the domesticity, migration, colonization issues that are discussed nowadays. And of course, these debates, it's important for you to know that they are all available online, but they were also further developed on the catalog that we, as our curatorship is divided in 2, the catalog is also composed of 2 books. And you can also, you are invited to check it and to have it, because it's quite a nice object. As a side note, we are also very proud to tell you that we got some prizes with both the exhibition design, but also with the catalog. And I will move now forward.
Recently, we had the opportunity to bring the exhibition to home, to Lisbon, to this nice palazzo in Lisbon, that it's the head office of the Trienal de Arquitetura de Lisboa, the Portuguese Trienal that happens in Lisbon, that actually will happen in a few weeks, so you are invited to visit. And for us, it was an opportunity to redesign the layout to a new place, but also an opportunity to meet a different public and to debate what was happening in this moment in Portugal. Well, it's a very specific moment, as you will see. And as one of the participants in the exhibition said, we have to start a debate. The cities of the future are the cities we are making now. So for us architects, this is a very obvious sentence, but actually very important, because, well, we need to decide now to live tomorrow. And we took this very urgent problem that we have in Portugal, the housing crisis. For you to know, the recent data tell us that 10% of the houses or the families are overcrowded in their homes. So it's a really huge problem that you need to face. And it's something that is already happened. So we invited a very nice group of young architects that just won competitions to draw very nice housing buildings, public housing buildings. And it was an opportunity to question the model that is in practice. And for you to know the scale of the problem, in this moment the Portuguese government has a commitment with the European Union, and in 4 years you have to build 37,000 housings, public housing, so it's a very huge problem to our scale. And of course, we should keep the debate open because it's a very good opportunity to have the architects planning the future.
Linking our contribution to the debate of how will we live together, and also to this debate, this common uncertainty that was so rightly diagnosed by the Spanish curators for this event, we think it's still necessary to look to the past and to learn from history. And going back to the beginning, at least to our beginning, to the starting point of this collective and ongoing process of living together, which began in 1974 and which is the Portuguese democracy, we can learn a few things and also see a few similarities to what we are living today. In this photo, for example, we see a neighborhood association demonstration of citizens. Almost all of them are actually kids. This is in 1974, and they are demanding better houses and a collective answer to the housing shortage that Portugal was living at that time. Because when our democracy began, Portugal was facing an impoverished economy, facing a deep housing failure, and it was all made worse by the demographic urgency of the decolonization. And Portugal received almost 1 million refugees from our former colonies. But looking to the present, we can see that the situation, more than 4 decades later, remains fragile and is marked by the persistence of the speculation in the urban centers, but also that these issues are being faced elsewhere in the world, from Australia, for example, to China. And so this exercise of finding architecture on the daily, communal and shared narratives brought to our homes by the media can still be done. And if we look back again to one of the most traumatic events in recent Portuguese history, which was the fire in Lisbon of Chiado in 1989, we can also see how these events keep happening, not in the city centers right now, but in our rural territory in the interior of the country and also elsewhere, and always made worse by the climate crisis. And once again, we have this pressing issue that we could find in our exhibition of the transformation of the territory, of the construction of infrastructure, of the extractivism of raw materials, and also the production of energy, which is one of the main issues that we have to address today. And so we are right now, the photo that we were seeing was from the 60s, but right now, Portugal and everywhere in the world, we are once again faced with the impacts of the transformation from a fossil-based economy into a renewable energies economy, not only in Portugal, of course, but also in the United States, for example. And these pressing issues, of course, have a lot to do with the kind of tragedies that we are looking to right now happening in Pakistan, that is also in a fragile position. So we always need to keep focused and to keep asking ourselves how will we live facing these conflicts. And so we believe that architecture's role and transformative power is eloquently summarized in another participant of our exhibition, an architect which is 93 years old, and who told us that on principle, I don't believe in consensus, I believe in conclusions. So I think that this is a responsibility that falls to an architect and that the architect has to take on. It's a decision, it's not an imposition, and it's not a consensus. And for us, this is a main issue that we should embrace in our careers. Thank you.
So beautiful. Beautiful, you guys. Thank you so much. Okay, so last but not least, we'll enjoy the intervention of our friend Vanessa Lacaille. Sorry. Based now in Geneva, she studied in France and the Netherlands. In 2013, she founded, together with Munir Ayoub, the practice, the Le Laboratoire d'Architecture. Their office works on architectural and landscape projects throughout Europe, the Arab world, and the Indian Ocean region. In 2014, the studio was awarded the European Album des Jeunes Architectes et des Paysagistes. In 2021, they were curators of the Swiss Pavilion at the 17th Venice Architecture Biennale with their project Orae, Experiences on the Border, and appointed in 2022 as visiting professors at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne. They will focus their work on the qualities and representations of inhabiting the nomad worlds. So please welcome Vanessa to the stage.
Thank you very much. What is the shortcut? No, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. And I'm really glad to share my uncertainties with you tonight. I'm going to tell you the story of this project, but first of all, I will present the team that compose the Swiss pavilion. It was with me, of course, but Mounir Ayoub was a part of it also. It's an architect and a journalist. Fabrice Aragno is a movie maker and a producer, and Pierre Shepsky is a modelist and also a sculptor. We got involved four of us, but also we work with during 2 years with inhabitants that are really part of the project and part of the team too. This project started in 2018, so a long time ago, when the Cultural Council of Switzerland make an open call for the Swiss pavilion. At this moment, our proposal was really simple. It was to explore and to study the physical reality and the sensitive perception of the border, the territory of the border, from the inhabitant. It was a nice idea, but why? This is the map of Switzerland. So why we decide to take care of the border? It was it's the edge of the country, of course, but also it's a political concern. It's a place of negotiation. It's a place of exchange between nations, and also it's a place of segregation, and it's a place of inequality. Inequality? No, yes. And so why the border is not considered for its own features, and for that it's inhabited territory. So when we start to explore the border, we discover in Switzerland that is not exactly what we expect to. This is the mountain, but it's also an image of the mountain. It's a representation, it's completely not the reality. We discover also that it has different issues. The legal one, for example, this one is the Bodensee, is the only place in Europe where you don't find border. It's a lake that links 3 countries, Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, and since early 20th century, it has no border, even during the World War. So it asks question. Of course, we spoke about that, the large-scale infrastructure and the production of energy in Switzerland, that it's always produced in the neighbor country, never in Switzerland. This is a dam that produces, dam between Italy and Switzerland that produced the energy for Zurich. So the negotiation is also to explode the difference of value and the difference of countries. Of course, the financialization of the border. This is a valley there. It's in the western part of Switzerland, and it has a special rule that it has no tax, so it's a duty-free ski station when you can buy a Rolex and you can go to ski. But yes, of course, the economical issue. You can find in Basel, for example, lots of infrastructure, economical industry or campus, pharmaceutical campus or cultural campus that profit or benefit of this difference of value. But always they say that the things that we don't want, we put it in the border. And of course, the social issue because Switzerland explodes a lot of commuters in the neighbors country. So this is Italian guys that come back from the train, and they work in Switzerland, and they do like 1.5 hours by train to go to work, and they come back every day, every week. And yes, there is a really long story about that, but it's It's a case of lots of people around Switzerland that go to work and come back to the country because they don't have the economical level to live in Switzerland. So the border is an inhabited territory, and yet it has also really contemporary issues. We thought that architects must work in those places and be more politically invest. Yes, they have. You said really well, guys, that we have a social role that we forgot to play since a long time, and we have to be back. So when we wanted to study the border, the first things we thought was, let's ask the people who live there. So now start the story of this pavilion. The project was a process, and the Venice Biennale was a step of this process, not the end. So it starts with this truck. We transform an old truck in a moving studio of model and videos, and we ask people who live in the border to help us to take the measure and of this singular territory by building models, representing models of the tangible and the intangible dimension. So during 7 months, we explored this territory. We went to 49 places. We met almost 200 people were involved in the project, and we built around 42 models that were transformed to be exhibited in Venice. As we traveled around the border, we crossed different territories, of course, but also we met men and women who lived the border in their everyday life, and they brought their own experience. They brought us in the really extraordinary place that are really ordinary when you don't know, and they modeled their territory with us, and they shared their knowledge and the expertise of this territory. And for example, I will just briefly speak about Richard. Richard is the first inhabitant who participated to the project. He took us to the bank of the Rhône, that is the river who make the border in Geneva, and he shown that this river is not something that separates people, but something that gathers people, because it's a structural element, and people feel that they are part to it and not separated by this river. It was a poetic thing, but also in another place, in the border of Switzerland and Italy, we met Ursula and Delia, that are okay, two girls that live just in the both sides of the border. One say that she's a baker, and she lives in this little village that is really beautiful, like a real paradise. And the other is housekeeper in the really luxury hotel, and she make the road by bus, 2 hours road by day to go to work, and for her it's really a territory where she doesn't belong. So for one, it's the left one, and for the other, it's another reality completely, and this is the same territory. And we, of course, met some people that are asking for asylum and refugees, and they remember that the border is really depending who you are. And for lots of people, you don't feel it, but for most of the world, it's still a barbed wire. So these stories have something in common. They remember us that at the border you are individually project to the world, to the mondialization in the most violent way sometimes. So, yes. But it's also a place of exchange. It has a really big potential, and we just don't work on it. So yes, this story continue a little bit. After this big tour, we had, this is a little architectural part, but I think you couldn't see it in the pavilion. But after this tour, we came back and pull all this production all together. And this was the first time where you can gather territories on the border together. This is not geographically possible. But yes, we put all the model, we see all the videos and all the transcription of interviews, and we start to make like a survey, because we were obsessed to give a form and to give a language to all this material. So we start to survey, to redraw, and to each element, each gesture, each texture was surveyed, and we start to create a language, a kind of language that come from the work with inhabitants in situ on the territory. And with that, a kind of language emerged, and this language, with this language, we imagine a big model that brought architecture more complex, because it could superpose reality, imagination, real, possible, and dreams. And we were building it when the pandemic happened, of course. So we have to pack everything and think again about the topic, of course, because we were thinking how we live together, how we will live together, and we had a certain image, and the actuality remembers that border still exists, and they can appear and be reinforced in 5 minutes. So we decide, we decide to continue to work on the territory, but we were in lockdown, so we had to invent a new way to come back, and we transform our truck on this mobile pavilion, and and we ask the same people where we were working with to come back and to speak and to participate to a kind of forums, 5 forums around all Switzerland, to create a new narrative of this territory together, to imagine the future of this territory together. So it was like a discussion, but also a collective writing, like you can see here, and a collective intelligence or consciousness collective project began and to take shape. Yes, just to finish about experiences, because it's the second title of the project. We have this important word in the project, that is experiences. How we can produce knowledge about the territory from the experience of in situ with the inhabitants. We were completely obsessed by this question: how we can give a shape, how we can see this architecture as an experience. First, we had this experience with working with inhabitants, making architecture together. We realize how far sometimes architects are from the social reality when they practice architecture. Does it exist an architectural project without inhabitants? So this was our question. This experience makes us develop a kind of aptitude to work together with inhabitants, to create a radical architecture, not a consensual architecture. And it comes from the conflict also. The conflict is just the friction and the way to keep the plurality of the people. Some architects speak about desalienation with inhabitants. So sometimes appear a kind of radical form that we couldn't imagine before, and those forms speak about a different architecture that speak about generosity, freedom, and creativity of situation. Then a second experience was the architectural space of this truck. We went through the project with this truck, and yes, I'm almost finished, promise. Yes, the question was how we could propose an appropriate answer to the question of the border. We just answer by the movement. Yes, we didn't want, all the project was made by the movement, itinerant with the people, and all the time also moving your mind, changing the point of view. And we didn't want to perpetuate and to monumentalize the border, so we just answer by this ephemeral and light and playful public space. During the lockdown, we invite people to work in this space, and in different situations. We had sometimes to employ them because they couldn't cross the border. And yes, it's this answer we had. And the last experience was the Swiss pavilion. It was an immersive installation and a relational map formed by what we call a mundus imaginalis of form, words, and image built with the inhabitant. I will just show you some image of the pavilion. We wanted to show the superposition of the narrative on the territory and show the complexity and question the certainties. And yes. And the exhibition ended by the garden and with the swing in movement. It was the place where the visitor could read and listen the voice of the inhabitants. We post on the wall the sentence from the dialogues that the inhabitant has about the possible future of the border. They engage themselves at this time during this forum that take place in March 2001 to make this territory the beginning of something and not the end. It's the title of the project. Orare comes from the Latin synonymous of border, but figuratively it means the beginning of something, the starting point of a collective project. This political and poetic commitment that the inhabitants have told us, we just try to follow it in our architectural practice. So that's it.
So powerful, thank you so much. Okay, so fantastic. No, you should actually stay because I want to, to everybody to join the stage, please. For the round table, I pass the mic to my colleague Domingo. So.
Working now? Yeah.
There's one some water.
Yeah. Well.
Okay, you want to?
I don't know.
See.
We will try, to be a little fast with this roundtable as we are a little of time, but I think we can manage.
Here I have the control.
So it's because we started a little later. So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us in this roundtable. As you all saw today, all the projects presented bears about the public space in its bigger sense, right? Its interactions and its limits. Full access is usually granted to some, whether it's to different territories, commodities, or sometimes more abstract matters like data, right? I would like to ask the table, to whoever wants to pick the question first. Do you think that maybe architectural design could, or maybe even should, be democratized in the sense that we can give society access to the tools and strategies to imagine and build their own spaces? It's kind of a weird question, okay. Also, I can go on, like, can architects become just, I think some of you even talk about this, like, can architects become just facilitators for the creation of good quality spaces? So, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think those are great questions. Sorry, hopefully you can hear me. I think a lot of what we were trying to explore in the Garden of Privatized Delights was the role of the architect within privatized public space, but also within the evolving city, and how we're living in times where, you know, we have jobs that didn't even exist 10 years ago exist, yet the architectural practice hasn't necessarily evolved that fast. And what is the role that we can actually take on? Like, we are great communicators as well as designers. You know, we have all these layering of skills. And so really trying to understand how architects can bring different people together. So when you were asking, what was it, whether society, whether architects can access tools and strategies, yeah. And sort of communicate that to citizens, because I guess as a citizen, you actually have a huge amount of say over what's going on around you, but often you don't realize you have that, or you don't have the tools to understand the power that you have, that you can come together as a community. And so what's the role of the architect in communicating that? In our catalogue, for example, it became a sort of manual of instructions to try and explain how people could start to take over ownership over their public spaces. So yeah, I would really agree with you that architects can be facilitators. But I also think we are designers, and we have a huge responsibility to make sure the environments that we live in are well designed in a way that sort of encourages people to come together, encourages inclusivity and allows for accessibility. Because I think there's also a danger when architecture becomes just about conversations and not kind of realizing. And I think in terms of realizing, it doesn't have to be necessarily a building or a built project, but using our design skills to kind of evolve and transform our cities. So quite a rambly answer.
But also, like, the question could also be like, are there limits to how much is possible or good, let's say, for the final user to be involved in the design of their own space? Like, when should we maybe stop our designs, right? There should always be kind of interaction with the final user, like a real interaction, no? Like, he actually designs some of the space, or maybe we should always like kind of guide the whole process.
Yeah, I think that somehow continue with her answers, that we have to be facilitators in a way, because we now don't have as much tools as we used to have before as architects. Architects before, they had all the tools, and now we have to work together with citizens, with designers. So at the end, it's not like this pyramidal way of working that we all dream, but that was an old dream, and it's not like that anymore. And I think that, especially now, I'm working with a lot of designers, and what I see is, apart from they don't facilitate as well as we architects do and communicate, they also don't understand like the scale of the city. I think that the power that we have as architects is that we are able to see like the city and the space and the territory from another distance, and we have people with a lot of skills of producing, of making, you know, a bench, or making a small square, or making something. They are very good at that, but they always have like this lack of understanding like how it works in more in the urbanistic way. I haven't met yet any designer that understands the city as a whole. They always go like for the small place. And I think that our work with architects has changed, and we have to enter to collaborate in that kind of horizontal way of working with other professions. But I think that our special skill is to understand like the scale.
Yeah, it's a conversation at every scale at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think especially now we're living in a world where we can't just keep on building. It's so bad for the environment. You know, we have an environmental responsibility to start reusing buildings more, to really question when we should be building and when we shouldn't be building. And I think this idea that a project is constantly evolving, and often, I think especially sort of in the Starchitects world that we've had previously, to our generation, I think we're much more sort of collaborative. That I think people are too scared almost to go back to projects and say what hasn't worked and learn from the kind of failures. There's almost this idea that people are too scared to fail, when in fact I think we should almost embrace these failures and learn from them. And, you know, post-occupation evaluation, I think that doesn't happen enough, like, you know, going back to projects and seeing how they're evolving over time. When people are actually using them, it's very different when it's on a piece of paper.
Just to take some, we have some presentations today that also talk about conflict, right? It's kind of in the same line with interacting with the final user, and how we as architects kind of we are like facilitators of this kind of space. We have some issues right now in our territory here in the islands, for example, that projects of certain scale always get contradiction from the general public, so, similar to what you show in your pavilion, right? So, do you think, for example, is there a maybe these large-scale projects like nowadays are not useful anymore, or something like this? It's like, do you think there is a way to eliminate this negative vision that, for starters, always have large-scale projects? It's for you.
I think I will make...
That's not for you, that's for you.
I think I will make a mix between the last question and this question, because I think, well, we should work as thinkers, so somehow large-scale projects are needed, because we have to have an overall vision of the future, and we have to put the pieces together. It doesn't mean that we should design in detail every inch of the territory, but we have to manage the territory. We are having an architectonical emergency here, not only, of course, not only a climate emergency, but I would say an architectonical emergency in the way, first step first, before we go and decide how far we should go in the design, I think we should achieve the point where the people understand why architects are important, and how we could help them, and how important is the quality of the space where we live in. I think we all understood in this pandemic how important is the quality of the space of your house, of your neighborhood, of your city. And I think we believe people know, but people still don't really understand. And that's why when after that you ask, okay, so how democratic, how far we should go, how freedom plays with in the middle. Yeah, so that's why I say we still live in an emergency somehow, because we live in a world of economics, mathematics, and technicians. So first step first, and somehow I combine the first question to the second question, because yeah, I think we have an emergency here. Hello. Any architect in the room?
I think we are all today. Iñaki, I wanted to ask you, because you can, in the work you show, there is a moment that you decide to let it go, like so clearly, right? It's like, okay, I put this to the public in order for them to change it however they want, however they need. Like, how do you find that exact moment? Like, how do you feel is, like, when do you decide that, okay, this is the moment I let it go for it to mutate all around the world?
I think that's a decision we made the first moment with the first prototype, we decided to make it open because, as I said, we have learned a lot from the open source community and the shared knowledge on the web, and that brought us a lot of knowledge as architects. And in 2009, it opened our eyes and see things, or we saw things could be done in other ways. So we thought we must do like that.
And Vanessa, you define borders in your catalog as the laboratory of the political, social, and economic phenomena of the 21st century. We were actually curious, how do you manage to work in a space that is usually considered even taboo, right? We usually don't talk that much about borders because it's maybe it's the most conflicted area we have to design.
Yes, but it's also the sharing space between countries, no? But the way that we manage is to change the scale, of the power, the decision, the power, where they take decision. Because of course, border is a political system that is global, but also it has a scale, territorial scales that can change. The people can change some things in the border, and I think to change the way that we act and to change the side, from the side to the power, to the side of the inhabitant, is also the way that we can change this territory.
Okay. So we now open the questions for the rest of the room. If anybody else wants to ask anything, we still have some time left. Anybody? Yeah, you can also keep talking. Yeah.
So talking about the borders is interesting. I'm going to make a little bit of publicity because Valencia is the World Design Capital this year. But next one is in 2024, and it's the first time that it's going to be 2 countries. It's going to be San Diego, Tijuana. So they are going to use like the World Design Capital as to use design and to see the conflicts between a border as heavy and as strong as San Diego with Tijuana. And so you were also telling before that we, or if I understood you correctly, that we have to somehow make understand people the importance of architects, that they have to try to understand. And somehow from a long time ago, I think that the architecture as a profession is kind of dead, and we we are not dealing with that, no? And we don't want to take account of that has happened. And now a lot of projects are made with people that has skills. No, they are designers. They are a lot. And what we have to do as architects, I think, is not to try to be as we used to be, like the top of the pyramid. I think that what we have to do is to go to the ground and start working with that kind of people with those skills and answering the questions that they do from the architectural point of view. So I think that we as architects, it's not that much that we have to keep on doing our profession, obviously, for building houses, for building schools. Okay, we have that kind of profession that is with a lot of normative, but we have to still doing that. But the thing of people that are here, that I think that we understand the architecture in another way. I think that we have to stop to understand like the architect at the top of the pyramid, and we have to work with designers, to work with artisans, to work with artists, and in that conversation, not to be like we are on the top of anything, just to include our way of developing the projects.
Does anybody else want to jump in?
We also put ourselves in this situation.
Yeah.
And people see us like the way we put it, but that's true. It has to be somehow maybe in the middle, right? They have to understand the importance, and we have to understand how to work with them.
We usually say that people recognize us as architects as the main makers of the financial crisis somehow, right? They always say, you architects, you did it all wrong, right? It's
yeah, but you know, normally with order of architects and schools of architects, always the debate is we have to make people understand how important we are. Yeah. No? And we are just focusing on that sentence. But we don't go beyond that sentence. It says, okay, they have to understand that we are important, that we are the good ones. And, you know, and just kind of against that sentence and doing nothing else.
Yes, because I think traditionally architects have just had these huge egos, and they've just been so wrapped up in the importance of what they do, that they then neglect to think about what it is we're really doing. And I think that's the importance again of going back and seeing how sort of, you know, something on a piece of paper actually really impacts where people are living. Because I agree with you. I think it's not about communicating our importance so much. I think it's about communicating actually what our skills are. Because I also think the general public have a very kind of narrow view of what an architect is. You're an architect, you must design buildings. And I think all of us here today gave really interesting presentations to show how we're exploring architecture in a way that isn't necessarily about just traditional types of building. And I think that's something that we need to try and communicate better, not only to the general public, but also to the industry, and start to really broaden the kind of role of what the architects can be.
Yeah, I think we can wrap this up with this thought, which was kind of what we wanted to give with this whole Congress. And well, first of all, thank you very much for accompanying today and for your fantastic presentations. Thanks everyone else for being here. And we will see you tomorrow, same time. There's still some food left if you want to take them. So, see you guys.
Thank you.